So, Neil deGrasse Tyson versus Elon Musk. You've probably seen the headlines, right? But the real story here isn't some petty feud. Nope. It's actually about this really big, fascinating idea that could completely change how we think about the future of space exploration. Let's dive in.
Okay, so this is it. This is the quote that lit up the internet. And, on the surface, it sounds like a pretty direct shot at SpaceX. And that is exactly how the media ran with it, framing it as a personal attack. But was that really what he meant? Was this just a simple dig at a billionaire visionary, or was it just one small piece of a much, much larger argument about how humanity has always, and I mean always, pushed its boundaries? And that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. To really get what's behind that quote, we have to peel back the clickbait headlines and look at history. Because Neil deGrasse Tyson isn't just talking about rockets and companies, he's talking about this historical pattern for how civilizations pull off their most ambitious, most expensive, and riskiest goals. And it all comes down to this concept he calls frontier projects. Now, these aren't just any old projects. We're talking about the massive, civilization-level achievements that are so insanely expensive and so risky that, honestly, they make zero sense from a purely financial point of view. And when you look back through history, this pattern just jumps out at you. I mean, from the pyramids to the Great Wall, all the way to the Apollo program. The biggest leaps humanity has ever taken have been driven by these huge forces like religion, royalty, and geopolitics, not a quarterly earnings report. Okay, so that's the history lesson. But how does this all apply to space today? Well, Tyson argues that there are two totally separate engines of progress running at the same time, and each one has its own unique job and its own motivation. And this slide, man, it just lays it out perfectly. You've got governments like NASA who are willing to take on just enormous risk for a geopolitical return on investment. Things like national pride, power, influence. Then you have private enterprise. They're driven by profit. They're the ones who come in after the path has been cleared to make things efficient and build a business. Getting this split is absolutely key to figuring out how we ever actually get to Mars. Tyson has this kind of funny way of making the point. He says, just imagine you walk into a room of venture capitalists to pitch a multi-trillion-dollar, incredibly risky mission to Mars. What's the very first question they're going to ask? What's the return on investment? And if you don't have a solid answer to that, well, that's a 5-minute meeting. That's why, for all of history, governments have been the ones to lead the charge into the true unknown. So, if Tyson's whole argument is that SpaceX isn't pushing the space frontier yet, does that mean what they're doing isn't important? No, absolutely not. And this is the critical piece of nuance that all those headlines just completely blew past. See, here's the twist. Tyson is making this super important distinction. He's not talking about the space frontier, as in where we go. He's talking about the engineering frontier, as in how we get there. And in that arena, SpaceX is an absolute revolutionary. I mean, what have they really accomplished? They have mastered rocket reusability. Landing those first-stage boosters and flying them again, that's something NASA never did and has completely changed the economics of getting to space. They have made access to orbit cheaper and more sustainable than anyone ever thought possible. This is a massive, massive deal. And his analogy for it is just perfect. For decades, we flew rockets that were basically disposable. Imagine flying a 747 across the ocean and then just pushing it off a cliff and building a new one for the return trip. That's what we did. SpaceX proved that rockets can be treated more like airplanes. It's a monumental engineering triumph, and it's the foundation for everything that's coming next. Okay, so we have the government's role, and we have private enterprises' role. What does all of this mean for the big dream, getting humans to Mars? Well, according to Tyson's framework, it's not a story about government versus private companies. It's a story of partnership. So this is basically his playbook, his prediction for how this will all shake out, based on those historical patterns. The government makes the huge, geopolitically motivated decision to go. NASA is put in charge of the mission. But then, NASA needs the hardware. They need a powerful, reusable rocket. And Elon Musk steps up and says, I have a rocket. And boom, you have a partnership. It's a perfect synergy. The government provides the will, and private enterprise provides the way. But hold on, because just when you think you've got it all figured out, this is where the story pivots in a really exciting way. After laying out this whole historical framework, Tyson himself admits that the game is changing, like right now, and that SpaceX is on the verge of making that next great leap all by themselves. He points specifically to SpaceX's plan to send an uncrewed Starship to Mars. Now, stop and think about what that really means. This isn't just another cargo run. This is a private company, for the first time in history, aiming to send a vehicle designed for humans to another planet.
And that right there, that's the punchline to this whole story. The supposed feud just evaporates. Tyson says it, plain as day. That mission would be advancing a true space frontier. And far from criticizing, he gives his full support. This was never a feud. It was an analysis that actually ends with incredible optimism for what's about to happen.
Which kind of leaves us with this final, really powerful thought to chew on. You know, maybe we've been looking at this whole thing the wrong way. Maybe it's not NASA versus SpaceX. Maybe the real path forward is more like a relay race, where the government runs that first, incredibly difficult leg into the total unknown and then passes the baton to private companies to run faster and more efficiently, taking all of us farther than we ever dreamed we could go.